punishing U.S. sanctions will be reimposed on Iran starting next week as part of President Trump's decision to pull out of the...
It's a crackdown on despots and dictators. Britain's government has announced its first sanctions since leaving the European Union.
When governments announce tough sanctions, it isn't the leaders or elites who feel the sting, but ordinary families at the supermarket and patients at the pharmacy. These sanctions, the so-called peaceful alternative to war, don't just squeeze governments. They empty grocery shelves, close hospital doors, and push families to the breaking point. The myth says sanctions target dictators, but the evidence shows they crush ordinary people. So, why do governments insist sanctions come with humanitarian exemptions, while children starve? And most importantly, if sanctions don't break regimes, who exactly do they break? Let's examine how sanctions work, and why the people paying the price are almost never the ones in power. Imagine you walk into your local grocery store and the prices have jumped almost overnight. That's exactly what happened in Moscow in early 2022. In the first week after the invasion of Ukraine, consumer prices leapt 2.2%, with food at the top of the list. Milk nearly doubled in price in 2 weeks, and staples like sugar and cereal were already 20% higher than the year before. Shops began limiting flour, oil, and sugar to stop hoarding. For Daria, who lives in central Moscow, the fear wasn't empty shelves but how high prices could climb. She stocked up litres of oil, bags of coffee, bottles of whiskey, and 3 months of blood pressure medication. Medicine wasn't technically under sanctions, but with global shipping companies pulling out, supplies were already uncertain. Jan, a European living in Moscow, gave another snapshot. A grocery order that cost 5,500 rubles in February was suddenly 8,000 rubles weeks later. And it wasn't just food. Electronics skyrocketed. Daria rushed to buy laptops for her family. What had cost 70,000 rubles in early February went to 100,000 by the end of the month, then to 140,000 before selling out completely. McDonald's closed its 847 branches after 3 decades in Russia, and within hours, people were reselling nuggets and pies online at 10 times the price, calling them the last taste of foreign bliss. A study of 32 nations under sanctions found living standards collapsed in 30 of them. Think about that. Almost every single case. In Afghanistan, hospitals couldn't import IV bags or antibiotics. In Venezuela, baby formula cost more than a week's wages, forcing mothers to boil roots to feed their infants. In Iran, pharmacies rationed insulin, while wealthier citizens could still buy imported luxury goods. This is how sanctions work at the ground level. When billions in a country's reserves are frozen abroad, imports collapse, currencies nosedive, and basic goods skyrocket in price. Russia saw over 300 billion euros of its assets locked away. Sounds like a clean financial hit on the government, right? But in reality, it was ordinary citizens who felt the squeeze. Groceries, rent, and essentials became unaffordable for millions, while elites found ways around restrictions through shadow trade networks. So the next time you hear economic penalties tightened, don't picture it as some abstract tool of diplomacy. Because behind every headline about sanctions, there's someone at a pharmacy counter, a grocery store, or a gas station, real people paying the cost. Governments like to insist that sanctions are smart, that food and medicine are exempt. But on the ground, it doesn't look that way. Take Syria in 2023. US sanctions technically allowed medical supplies, yet hospitals struggled to rebuild water plants because construction services were banned. Oxygen concentrators, life-saving equipment during a respiratory crisis, got stuck in customs, flagged as dual-use items that could somehow serve the military. Patients waited, hospitals rationed, and doctors were left with their hands tied. Or look at Cuba. 6 decades of US sanctions left hospitals scrambling during the pandemic. A comprehensive report by Oxfam detailing the impact of the US sanctions on Cuba highlights difficulties in obtaining basic medical supplies such as syringes, masks, ventilators, medicines, as well as the raw materials needed to produce vaccines, medicines, and sanitary hygiene products. Shortages of food and other basic products affect the most vulnerable in Cuba, and the tightening of the sanctions has increased inequalities in Cuba. Afghanistan, Iran, and Venezuela show the same pattern. When foreign currency is choked off, governments can't pay suppliers abroad. Pharmacies ration insulin, shipments of antibiotics stall, and cancer patients bargain for smuggled chemo. In Russia, When the country was cut off from SWIFT, Natasha's small gym in Moscow lost customers overnight. Rent and equipment costs jumped 30%, and she knew closure was inevitable. Across the country, real incomes dropped by 25%. Meanwhile, oligarchs shifted money through Kazakhstan or used shadow fleets to keep trading oil. The poor stood in line for sugar, while the rich found loopholes. Children are often the first to suffer. Under UN sanctions in Iraq, child mortality doubled. An estimated 567,000 children died from malnutrition and